Hi, I'm David Singleton, founder and partner of L2 Fluency, along with Paul May. Welcome to March's Greek Peak. Translators strive for two goals in their work: accuracy and relevance. People balk at translations that are deemed paraphrases or amplified texts using unnecessary synonyms. But language changes. Words pass out of existence or become stilted, formal, old-sounding, or too colloquial. Cultures, too, change, which means that ideas associated with words are altered, because culture dictates association of words to customs, attitudes, and values. Since cultures and language change, it's always good to evaluate accuracy and relevance every so often in the translations we use. By doing so, we gain an appreciation for the work done by those who continue to give us the New Testament. Luke 13:20-21 gives us a picture of how translators try to achieve their main two goals. Let's begin by familiarizing ourselves with an interlinear, literal, modern translation of the Greek text. It says, "And again, he said, 'To what will I compare the kingdom of God? Like it is yeast, which, having received, a woman hid in of flour containers 3 until it rose the whole.'" Let's now compare versions, starting with the Geneva Bible of 1560, published in London beginning in 1595. The rendering then was, "And he said, Whereunto shall I liken the kingdom of God? It is like leaven, which a woman took and hid in 3 pecks of flour, till all was leavened." Skipping down the timeline almost 200 years, we come to the Darby translation of 1867. The verse reads, "And again he said, 'To what shall I liken the kingdom of God? It is like leaven, which a woman took and hid in 3 measures of meal, until the whole was leavened.'" In 1991, the New Century Version is printed. The phrasing 114 years later reads, "Jesus said again, what can I compare God's kingdom with? It is like yeast that a woman took and hid in a large tub of flour until it made all the dough rise." Finally, one can see the kinds of changes that happen in just 2 decades, when the time span between versions is shorter and easy printing methods have slowed English changes considerably. Between the New Century Version in 1991 and the Voice Bible of 2011, 2 changes of any note at all have been made. Large tub becomes huge quantity, and all becomes whole batch. Reading level and audience interest seem to be the issues between the 2 modern versions. For instance, does a reading audience care about the level of detail for 3 sata in Greek? 3 sata has an exact measurement if the reading audience wants to know it. The translators are betting that the audience just wants to know the gross equivalent rather than the exact measure. So they translated large tub and huge quantity. Even the Greek equivalences of flour and dough are used in the same places in the text. Some grammatical changes were made, but the whole focus is on vocabulary in this study. By comparing the centuries-apart translations, one can easily see the gradual modernizing of the English and the cultural ideas associated with the words. Whereunto in 1560 becomes to what in 1867, which changes to what paired with in 1991. Leaven is left the same in both the Geneva and Derby versions, but is changed to yeast in the New Century version. Pecks of flour in 1560 changes to measures of meal in 1867, then to large tubs of flours in 1991. Till becomes the more formal until for the last 3 centuries. And interestingly, because people in modern society don't make their bread any longer, leavened has to include the idea of dough rising before readers of modern America could more readily understand the term. Leavened has all but dropped from English usage by 1991. What has not changed is the word kingdom. It appears across all the centuries and still appears in the top 10 translations of the 20th and 21st centuries. That's particularly curious in light of vocabulary updates over 4.5 centuries between the Geneva Bible and the New Century Version, and begs the question of why translators haven't been willing to change kingdom to make their translations relevant. Since the beginning of the U.S. in 1783, there has never been a kingdom for Americans to relate to. Canada and Australia never severed their ties to England and are still British Commonwealth nations, with Queen Elizabeth as their monarchy's official head. But in America, the idea of kingdom faded to black 235 years ago. So why not change kingdom? To be sure, the change of kingdom to another word has been debated. The two questions that immediately arise are first, why change a word if people fully understand it? And second, what would a suitable modern word be that wouldn't change the meaning of the statement the word is in? Regarding the first question, I would say that people cognitively understand the term, but they do not experience the effects of living in a kingdom. Not to have living experience with what a word represents is the same as saying you understand what the college experience is when you have never had it, or what raising children is like if you have never raised any. Regarding question 2, one has to find a modernized word that offers the same notion as kingdom. The word for nation, people, geographical region, and country could be used, but Greek has words for those synonyms and didn't use them. So a translation is needed that yields a cultural and semantic equivalent of kingdom. When rendering changes in a new version, there is also the matter of tolerance to change that translators have to anticipate. For example, the word till was changed to until. The modern usage of till is relegated to speech that is non-standard, informal, or colloquial. The tolerance for change doesn't even register with people because formal to informal requires only the smallest portion of tolerance. Only people brought up to respect great formality would even notice the change. People expect to modernize language, but only if obvious archaic language is evident. Altering leaven for yeast passes muster because leaven has a need to be updated. Most people today, especially people under 40, have never seen bread baked and would have to ask what leaven is. Then there is the matter of bringing meaning from words of an ancient society to match a notion in practical use in a modern society. The word sata is a good example in this passage. Do we continue to use the word pex from 1560? Measure from 1867 for a generic unit of measure? Or do we use some equivalent, such as large tub, found in the New Century Version in 1991? A tolerance level exists among readers for modernizing words, but it varies from person to person, ranging from wanting a word to conform to measurements used in the current society, such as pegs in 1560, to replacing a specific idea with something generic, like large tub in 1991. Aluru requires the same line of thinking. Meal in 1867 has almost dropped from modern English, whereas flour, still in common use, has been recycled from 1594 to be used again in 1991. Dough is even better, since people very rarely see the mix of bread before the dough stage. It also appears in the 1991 version and is effective because most people wouldn't know that you have to add yeast to the flour before it becomes dough so that it can rise. They buy dough in cans or packages with yeast already in it. What happens to kingdom then? Why not change it? What would be the one-word equivalent? Americans can follow when Jesus moves from the concrete nature of his request in the Lord's Prayer for his kingdom to come to the abstraction he makes to Pilate that his kingdom is not of this earth. Thus, one suggestion people have made is reign. Reign is understood both concretely and abstractly. People understood that a ruler embodies the idea of a kingdom and has also the intangible idea of influence over their lives in tangible ways. Moreover, Christians have more than likely heard the phrase, God's reign, in their lives. Reign is still a regnal word, though, and really has no experiential value in Americans' lives. The idea of place is also a good suggestion. It has no direct association with the monarchy in any way, and it can be understood as both concrete and abstract. The place of heaven, the place of God, can be in a spot imagined rather than abstractly somewhere in the universe, as the movie Contact illustrated, or in one's heart. A person can also show God's place as center position in one's life. The idea of both concrete and abstract notions of place work out well in other statements of Jesus. Some of his well-known remarks are found in various places, starting with the Sermon on the Mount in Matthew 5. It's so favorable for the poor in spirit, for they belong to heaven's place. And from the same sermon, Matthew 6, place God first in your life, and his decency and everything else will follow. And he wanted to satisfy his followers' curiosity in Mark 4. So he said, how can I describe God's place? What analogy illustrates it best? He also encouraged his followers in Luke 9. It's true that some standing here now will not die before experiencing God's place in their lives. Or the crux to all of Jesus' teaching in John 3:3. Jesus replied, unless you are born again, you cannot enter God's place. I find that people are opposed to changing kingdom, however. They say they can still imagine the word kingdom's notion and what it entails cognitively, but they find it harder to understand place abstractly, even though it is easy to understand concretely. If both freedom and place can be comprehended concretely and abstractly, it only shows that mental conditioning has occurred because kingdom has appeared for centuries in the versions of the Bible, even the translations after America gained their independence from England's monarchy. It's hard to shift people to new understanding when mental conditioning is present. Kingdom can easily be replaced with more modern ideas. It's just that people are resistant and translators do not want to swim against the current when they don't have to in order to get their translations accepted. But it defies intuition to change aluru from meal to flour to dough, or shift sata from peck to large tub, or substitute yeast for leaven, and not update kingdom to place. Take 35 seconds to consider the great number of decisions that have to be made to go from Greek to modern English. It should be the easiest exercise in translation to translate kingdom as place. Sometimes we need to examine our preferences and biases in order to make the ideas Jesus presented to us a relevant experience for ourselves. If our understanding of Jesus' representations of God don't fully become a part of our daily experience, as opposed to our mere cognitive reasoning, then perhaps a touch of Pharisaical thinking has entered our minds. This mental conditioning was what Jesus sought to completely overturn with his death, burial, and resurrection. And to understand Jesus' sacrifice in our own language and culture, we want to hear his message in the closest possible way he delivered it. And then our everyday experiences will illustrate our understanding for all to see. So when Jesus speaks to us from Luke 13, in the language we use in 2022, what would we hear about God? This. What is God's place in my life like? It's like a woman who mixes a small amount of yeast into her bread dough, and even though no one notices it, it makes the whole loaf of bread rise. I can certainly understand and actualize this teaching. No one can see God inside me, but when I am present anywhere, every person can see his evidence everywhere around me.